What's up guys, welcome to Shu's channel. Today we're diving into the insane story of another total mad lad, David Hahn. This 17-year-old prodigy built a fully functional nuclear reactor from scratch using nothing but junk parts and a mountain of lies. Late on the night of August 31st, 1994, in Shelby Township, Michigan, a pickup truck with its taillights off crept down a pitch-black rural road. It lurched forward, stopped, then did it again, acting deeply, obviously suspicious. A patrolling officer flipped on his siren immediately and pulled the vehicle over. Behind the wheel was 17-year-old David Hahn, his eyes darting wildly, his whole body shaking uncontrollably. At first, the officers assumed this was nothing more than a run-of-the-mill team tire theft, and sure enough, in the bed of the pickup, they found a full tire removal kit, plus several stolen car tires. But when one officer reached for a set of sealed lead canisters in the back,
first few days,
the radiation detector in his partner's hand suddenly erupted,
sitting by the reactor for hours every day, logging data,
every single person on the scene numbers on his Geiger counter. The bomb squad was rushed to the location. When he walked out of the professional-grade Geiger counter maxed out, he discovered the horrifying the second it got within inches of the truck bed. The meter still maxed out. The incident commander immediately ordered a full evacuation. It still screamed. The devices in that truck were pumping out radiation at more than 1,000 times radiation the safe limit for human exposure, even 500 meters away. No one there could have imagined that this teen, pulled over for stealing tires, is insidious, had just built a unforgiving nuclear high-energy gamma rays reactor, neutron streams, one capable of triggering straight through the wooden walls of the shed, self-sustaining, seeped into his family's home, chain reaction, spread to the houses of the 5 families living nearby, 10-square-foot wooden even leached into the soil backyard and groundwater beneath the property. Within 24 hours, the case would grab the attention of the radiation level inside the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the Department of Energy, and even the Pentagon. It would go down as the most outrageous and most dangerous amateur nuclear incident in American history. The boy who nearly turned an entire suburban neighborhood into a permanent nuclear exclusion zone was born October 30th, 1976, to a working-class family in Michigan. Unlike the stereotypical gifted child prodigy you might picture, David's childhood was defined by instability and upheaval. His parents split when he was just 4 years old. He was raised by his father, a long-haul trucker who was almost never home, and a stepmother who paid him almost no mind. Shy, withdrawn, and with barely any friends his own age, David found his only real escape in nuclear physics. When he was 10, he pulled a copy of Introduction to Nuclear Physics off his father's bookshelf, and, from that moment on, he became utterly obsessed with the world of atomic science. While other kids his age played baseball and watched cartoons, David spent every cent of his allowance on college-level nuclear physics textbooks. By 12, he could recite the decay properties, half-lives, and critical masses of every radioactive element on the periodic table, completely from memory. By 14, he'd worked his way through the full undergraduate nuclear physics curriculum from Michigan State University. He'd built a technical knowledge base that outstripped even that of many college graduates. What pushed him to actually build a nuclear reactor with his own 2 hands was a single merit badge, the Boy Scouts Atomic Energy Badge. It was one of the most prestigious science honors in the Boy Scouts of America, and in the decades since its creation, fewer than 11% of Scouts had ever earned it. The vast majority of those who did earned it by writing a paper on nuclear safety, building a simple model of a nuclear reaction, or at most, assembling a basic Geiger counter. But David, single-minded and unyielding to a fault, set an unprecedented goal for himself. He would build a fully functional nuclear breeder reactor, one capable of sustaining a fission chain reaction. He would earn that badge with a feat no scout before him had ever pulled off. The biggest barrier to building a reactor was never the theory. It was getting his hands on high-purity radioactive materials all but impossible for a private citizen to access. But this 17-year-old came up with a bold, shockingly airtight plan. He created an entire fake identity. Professor Hahn from the Nuclear Physics Research Institute at Michigan State University. He set up a fake university email address and even had a custom fake institute seal made. Using this identity, he wrote hundreds of meticulously crafted, deeply technical letters to dozens of nuclear chemical companies, isotope suppliers, medical device manufacturers, and even hospital radiology departments across the country. In the letters, he claimed he needed small quantities of radioactive isotopes for undergraduate classroom demonstrations and student research projects. Armed with a technical understanding well beyond his years, he flawlessly answered every technical question the suppliers threw at him. He even fooled the radiology directors at multiple hospitals. And in the end, he got his hands on multiple types of highly radioactive, potentially lethal materials. He collected more than 1,000 used smoke detectors from scrapyards, fire department surplus, and even old houses in his neighborhood, stripping each one for its core americium-241. He extracted high-purity thorium-232 from old gas lamp mantles using a chemical precipitation process. He separated uranium-238 from the uranium-rich orange glaze on vintage ceramic dishware. He even tricked a medical device company into sending him radium-226 from old glow-in-the-dark watch dials, and secured tiny amounts of medical-grade radium from a local hospital. In his later FBI interrogation records, David confessed that the total amount of radioactive material he'd collected was enough to give dozens of people acute radiation sickness in a short period of time. With all his core materials assembled, David converted that 10-square-foot, unventilated wooden tool shed in his backyard into his own private nuclear laboratory. With no professional nuclear equipment at his disposal, he built an entire reactor system out of scrap parts he found at the junkyard. Every single step aligned perfectly with the theory in his nuclear physics textbooks. He mixed his purified radium-226 and americium-241 to create a homebrew neutron source capable of emitting a steady stream of neutrons to drive the reaction. He used thick lead sheets scavenged from the scrapyard to build a crude radiation shielding bunker in the corner of the shed. He even built a working centrifuge out of parts from a car air conditioning compressor to further purify his radioactive isotopes, and welded together a stainless steel reaction vessel to hold his core fission materials. The reactor he set out to build was a thorium breeder reactor. Put simply, it works like this. Neutrons released from the neutron source bombard the nuclei of thorium-232 atoms. The thorium absorbs the neutrons and decays into uranium-233, a nuclear fuel capable of sustaining a nuclear fission chain reaction nearly identical in properties to the uranium-235 used in nuclear power plants and atomic bombs. Once the chain reaction is triggered, the reactor will continuously produce nuclear fission while releasing massive amounts of high-energy nuclear radiation. Starting in May 1994, David conducted his wild experiment in that airtight wooden shed. He had no professional protective suit, only a pair of welder's gloves and a dust mask. No professional radiation containment system, only a few mismatched lead plates. No professional monitoring equipment, only a second-hand Geiger counter with a limited range. For 3 months, he holed up in that shed every day after school, tweaking the position of the neutron source, the ratio of his nuclear materials, the design of his reaction vessel, failing dozens of times. Then, one afternoon in August 1994, he adjusted the neutron source one last time, flipped the switch, and his Geiger counter erupted in a steady, piercing whine. The numbers kept climbing. David's hands began to shake. He'd done it. The crude device, built from scrap and fraudulently obtained materials, had successfully triggered a nuclear fission chain reaction. It was a real, working, nuclear breeder reactor. In his FBI interrogation records, David said that in that moment, he had only one thought. He was about to become the youngest person in American history to build a nuclear reactor, and that atomic energy badge was as good as his. What he failed to realize, though, was that once nuclear fission begins, it can no longer be controlled by a teenager in a backyard shed. For the first few days, he was lost in the euphoria of his success, sitting by the reactor for hours every day logging data, completely ignoring the climbing numbers on his Geiger counter. It wasn't until a week later, when he walked out of the shed with the detector, that he discovered the horrifying truth. The meter still maxed out in his family's living room. It still screamed when he stood on his neighbor's lawns. He could still detect radiation far above the safe limit, even 500 meters away at the end of his street. Nuclear radiation is insidious and unforgiving. High-energy gamma rays and neutron streams had already passed straight through the wooden walls of the shed, seeped into his family's home, spread to the houses of the 5 families living nearby, and even leached into the soil and groundwater beneath the property. At that point, the radiation level inside the tool shed hit 1,500 milliroentgens per hour, 3,000 times the safe limit for human exposure. Just 2 hours inside would cause irreversible acute radiation damage. 24 hours inside would be almost certainly fatal. Only then did David snap out of his prodigy fantasy and feel a bone-deep terror. He finally understood that what he'd built wasn't a scientific breakthrough. It was a nuclear contamination hazard big enough to render his entire community uninhabitable. His first instinct wasn't to alert the authorities. It was to destroy the evidence. He worked through the night to dismantle the reactor, stuffing all the highly radioactive materials and reactor components into lead canisters and sealed steel drums. His plan was to drive the materials out to the woods in batches, bury them deep underground, and erase all trace of his reckless experiment forever. Late on the night of August 31st, 1994, he headed out with the first load of nuclear material, planning to bury the most dangerous components first. That's when he was pulled over by the police, his deadly secret exposed in the back of his pickup truck. When the story broke, it sent shockwaves across the entire United States. The U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, or NRC, immediately activated its highest-level nuclear emergency response. Working alongside the FBI and nuclear experts from the Department of Energy, they locked down the entire neighborhood around David's home overnight and evacuated all nearby residents. When specialists in full hazmat suits entered the tool shed with high-precision monitoring equipment, they were horrified by what they found. In the official NRC report released after the incident, officials wrote that the radiation levels at the site were extremely hazardous, with nuclear contamination already seeping into the surrounding soil and the walls of nearby homes. Had the incident gone undiscovered for another 1 or 2 months, the entire neighborhood would have become an uninhabitable, permanent nuclear exclusion zone. To fully clean up the contamination, the NRC launched the largest private nuclear cleanup operation in U.S. history, codenamed Operation Cabin Cleanup. Crews dismantled and removed David's entire tool shed piece by piece, along with all his lab equipment, nuclear materials, and even the top 60 centimeters of soil from his yard. Every bit of it was sealed in radiation-proof shipping containers, classified as high-level transuranic nuclear waste, and transported to the EnviroCare National Nuclear Waste Disposal Site in Utah for permanent storage. In total, the cleanup removed 11 cubic meters of nuclear contaminated waste, with a direct cleanup cost of more than $60,000, equivalent to nearly $130,000 in 2026. Most people assume the teen who nearly caused a nuclear disaster would face years in prison. But in the end, because he was a minor at the time, had no malicious intent to cause harm, and no one was injured by the materials, U.S. prosecutors never filed criminal charges against him. He received only a lifetime ban from possessing or handling any radioactive materials. He never did get that atomic energy badge from the Boy Scouts. Even so, the incident destroyed his life completely. After the story went public, David became infamous across America, stuck with the nickname the Radioactive Boy Scout for the rest of his life. He was shunned by his neighbors and stared at by strangers, pushing the already withdrawn teen into a deep downward spiral. He developed severe depression, anxiety, and paranoid personality disorder, and turned to alcohol and painkillers to numb the pain for years on end. After high school, he joined the U.S. Navy, hoping to escape the shadow of his past. But his worsening mental health led to a mandatory medical discharge not long after he enlisted. After leaving the military, his life completely unspooled. He was arrested multiple times for theft and possession of contraband. In 2007, at 31 years old, he was arrested again for stealing smoke detectors from his neighbors' homes. Police found radioactive materials and lab equipment once again in the motel room where he was living. Even then, he never let go of his obsession with building a nuclear reactor. Years of radiation exposure also destroyed his body. By his late 20s, his hair had turned gray, his teeth were falling out, his skin showed irreversible radiation damage, and his organs were in steady decline. On September 27, 2016, David Hahn was found dead in his apartment in Michigan at just 39 years old. The autopsy revealed his cause of death was acute intoxication from a combination of alcohol and painkillers, the end result of years of severe alcoholism. The boy who once had a pure, all-consuming passion for nuclear physics died a lonely, tragic death, his life forever altered by one reckless experiment in a backyard shed. To this day, David Hahn's Radioactive Boy Scout incident remains the most cautionary tale in the history of U.S. nuclear regulation. In the wake of the incident, the NRC tightened sales and control rules for civilian radioactive materials, and the Boy Scouts of America revised the requirements for the Atomic Energy Badge, banning all hands-on experiments involving radioactive materials entirely. There is no shortage of people with a deep passion for science, and no shortage of courage to challenge the unknown. But true science is never reckless, boundaryless risk-taking. It is never indifference to rules, to nature, or to human life. Even the most profound passion, when stripped of reverence and respect, can spiral into an irreversible disaster. And respect for human life? That is, and always will be, the inviolable bottom line of all scientific exploration.